Hello, and welcome to the Lakeshore Records podcast, On Cue With. I'm your host, Alon Levitan, and I had the great pleasure of speaking with BAFTA award-winning Danish composer Jesper Kyd, who's widely celebrated for his experimental approach to creating iconic music for blockbuster video game franchises, including Assassin's Creed, Borderlands, Darksiders, Hitman, and State of Decay. In our wide-ranging conversation, we discussed his first childhood compositions on a Commodore 64, Viking ethnomusicology, the great Jean-Michel Jarre, Jespers' live performance-based approach to sonic world building, and much, much more. Upon release, Assassin's Creed Valhalla became the #1 soundtrack record in multiple countries and is currently available on streaming platforms everywhere via Lakeshore Records. Without further ado, I give you the great Jesper Kyd. Jesper, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Doing really good. Thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. Congratulations on the #1 record. I think you beat out 2 Spider-Men, Hamilton, some Trolls, plenty of others. Congratulations. Multiple countries, US #1 on the iTunes soundtrack charts. I mean, really, really impressive.
Thank you, man. Thank you, dude.
Yeah, it's an incredible score. So much to talk about, but let's first start from the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up, your first musical influences? I read that you played the piano at a young age and began composing on a Commodore 64.
Yeah, so I grew up in right outside Copenhagen in Denmark. I grew up with a piano in the house, and whenever we would go visit family, there was always a piano, and this is such a weird thing to think back on, but like my uncles and aunts and grandparents, there was always a piano. And so whenever I was bored, I would sit and play on this piano trying to figure out this instrument. And that's really hard started for me. I was not that interested in playing other people's music. I was more interested in trying to figure out how to produce emotions with this instrument. And once for Christmas, I got a Commodore 64, my brother and I. And, of course, we got it for the games and was going to play a lot of those. But what I noticed about that machine and the games on the Commodore was that the music, I mean, it was incredible. And actually, the Commodore 64 has an analog sound chip inside, and I believe it's the first computer and console with an actual analog music chip inside. So the music these composers were able to create completely fascinated me, and I became obsessed with this music. I wanted to try to figure out how the hell can they have the same instrument that I have, and they can make that kind of music. All the tools I have are right in front of me. You got the Commodore 64 right there. How do I figure out how to make music like this? And so I would go through different music programs, and at one point I found a really good music program, and just it became 1 track a day. I just had to make a piece of music a day. I didn't care if it was good or if it was bad. It was just about I just enjoyed it so much. You could say, I became kind of addicted to making music.
But where did that drive, the work ethic, come from? I mean, I understand, loving something, but this, just even conceptually, a track a day is pretty advanced for a kid, right?
I didn't see it like that. I didn't put this worth ethic into play on purpose. It just was something that every time I was done with homework, it was just something that I started doing. And as I started writing more and more music, I became aware that there was this whole subculture that existed on the Commodore 64, and with thousands of people making demos and intros. And what these things are is you have a programmer who does some programming tricks, then you have a graphic artist, and then you have a musician, and the programmer puts those things together, and there's an overall design. So you could call it like a 10-minute music video, or on the Commodore 64 they were more like 3-minute music videos. And I became extremely fascinated with that whole scene. So my friends at that time were like programmers and graphic artists, and our passion was to prove to everyone else that we were the best at something, so there was this intense competition in this demo scene with these hundreds of groups from all over Europe. And there would be like big competitions. You would travel to these parties with thousands of people sitting on their computers, presenting these demos, winning prizes and money. And there was just this drive to prove that we were, that we kicked ass, and, that we could do things that nobody had even thought was possible on a Commodore 64, which later became the Amiga computer, when I really got involved with demo scene. And we did some demos there that became very well known. And that's when we founded a game company. There was always this drive just to show that we could do things our own way. And that ended up with us founding a game company, and we sold our first game to Sega. Those are my friends, and those guys are the same guys who founded IO Interactive later on.
Wow.
So I became part owner of a game company. I was like, I don't know, 18 or something. My first game score came out when I was 17. I would do everything I could to try to end up working in the game industry.
Very interesting. I was not aware of that. That's really interesting. So you've been on every side of the creative process as far as the games go.
Well, I've always done the music, but I've been very close to the whole side of it, programming and graphics. When we first became really active in the demo scene, and when we kind of rose up to the top, perhaps you could say, that was on the Amiga, and there was a demo group called Silence, and they invited us to become Silence Denmark, and we would have our own division. But interestingly, Silence Sweden became Digital Illusions, DICE in Sweden, which is one of the biggest game companies in Scandinavia. And Silence Denmark eventually led a lot of those people and founded IO Interactive, the biggest game company in Denmark. So, we were just a group of, looking back, super talented people, and I was feeding off on all that energy. And there was just this, there was this vibe. We would listen to, Skinny Poppy all day and program, everybody wearing black, long hair, metal music. It was kind of rebellious, and it's like, we're going to do our own 3D engine. We're not going to use somebody else's 3D engine. Or when I worked some of my very first game soundtracks on the Sega Genesis, we did our own music program for that, because we weren't going to use Sega's music program, because we could do much better. And so this was the whole spirit of the demo scene. And I still carry this with me today, this kind of drive to do things a bit differently, to try to combine things in unusual ways and see where it ends up. All that was something that I started in the demo scene when I was, I don't know, 15.
Very, very cool. It's very punk rock. It's a very punk rock approach.
Yeah, now that I live over here, it's a good way to put it. Absolutely.
I'm wondering aesthetically, your approach to composing for open world gameplay. What is your approach, given, because it's not sequential, right? So you don't know the choices the player will make, specific timing or anything. So what is your general ethos or approach to that form of composition?
Well, first of all, I like to pull out a bit and have more of an overview, and remind myself that we are building worlds. So,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds cool, I know, world building, but that really is a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you build these worlds, you have to take into account everything the game player can do and all the mechanics that are in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have that laid out in front of you and you have a good idea of what this game is going to feel like and play like, you can start zooming in on things. Oh, there's going to be a lot of stealth. We need to focus on a lot of stealth music. There's going to be combat. There's going to be tension. There's going to be suspense. You try to come up with all the different elements within the gameplay that you want the game player to feel. And once you break all those feelings down, you can zoom in and say, I'm going to write 2 or 3 minute suspense music for when this happens,
Mm-hmm.
or 2 or 3 minute combat music for when this happens. And it works very differently in video games because you don't have to worry about, how long you decide to stay in that mood is up to the game player.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that piece of music has to be quite expansive and quite long if a game player decides to do this specific thing for much longer than the development team had perhaps
Mm-hmm.
expected. You don't want the game to sound like you don't want the music to not sound good just because a game player decides to do it this way. So you have to take all of that into account and make this giant amount of possibilities. And then, of course, you also have exploration music, which is, for when you're exploring the maps or when you're not engaging in a mission, but when you're just exploring and there's no danger. And those moments I find fascinating as well, because you can create longer pieces of music, 3-4 minutes pieces of music that encourages the game player to keep exploring. And I think of that as a way to keep the atmosphere going, keep the game player invested in that world. It's almost like the music pulls you in more and more, and it adds a lot of depth to the world. And I think especially in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it's quite apparent that the soundtrack is adding all this additional depth to the world. When you're in a frozen environment, the music that plays there, it makes you kind of cold. You have to really think these things through. And so once you have all the elements, you can start to combine it together. That's my approach on open world scoring. Other styles and game, like other game types, do different things. But open world, this approach is that's how I see it, for open world games.
Very interesting. It's also what I find fascinating about it is like there's a lot of is my blue, your blue, because are we seeing the same thing or hearing the same thing? Because as I play the game, I'm literally hearing difference based on my choices versus your choices. When you play the game, I'm hearing different score cues, right?
Right.
I'm experiencing a different symphony. But it's interesting to note, and I didn't realize this, you do, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing what you said, but you're putting your thumb on the scale a bit as a sort of god or composer who is saying, well, in this world, you may be best served giving X, Y, and Z sonic cues to explore more. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that the music can hint at things like, if, for example, I'm not, for example, if there's an area that you have some secrets in, the music can definitely help you. Like if it's some music starts over there, immediately it will hint, oh, there's something over here, something special over here. But I mean, yeah, you do. I mean, you do end up putting your vision into the game, obviously. And also another thing I like to draw on is the story, and putting elements of the story that you might not be playing at that moment, but I still like to remind you, that is the story, and that is something that's going on. Now, that can be hard in video games because we don't always know how long you have progressed in the story. Do you know what I mean? So if you decide not to go on a story path and you just want to explore and see everything, the music still has to support that. But then once you take the path of the story, it's not like we can have new music every step of the way if it takes you 60 hours to play through the story. We don't have 60 hours of music like in a movie. Everything is scored from beginning to end. Games are becoming so huge that you do have to take a lot of things into account. But sprinkling the story, or even have specific cues when something very important happens, of course, is another aspect that's really important, I feel, for open world games and in general.
Given all the amazing scores you've created for different periods and geographic locations, you're quite the ethnomusicologist. So I'm wondering, how did you go about absorbing the historical context for Assassin's Creed Valhalla?
Well, growing up in Denmark, the Viking, the Viking thing is quite deeply imprinted on us. It's something that we're taught about a lot, and we have a lot of Viking settlements in Denmark and Viking museums, and so it's always been. It's always, it's never been like far away in the back of my head. It's always been part of your DNA, coming out of that world. For Valhalla, I did a lot of research, especially on the more spiritual side of things. I really think they have a outstanding, complex afterlife system in play, probably one of the most complex ones I've heard about. They also have so many different gods that represent so many different things. It's like there's so much there to tap into. And I did work on getting different levels of spirituality into the music. That was a very conscious thing. I wanted the music to be, especially the exploration music, to be a bit abstract, and to be something that different people who heard it would interpret different ways. You go in, you do the research. I did a lot of research on instruments as well. And of course, the takelharpe is the quintessential Viking instrument, but outside of that, I added a lot of other instruments, like the Croth or the rebec, metal drums. I got a takelharpe cello. A lot of instruments that you could say were ancient instruments, but it's so the instruments were another big part of the research.
Were there any particular scales or modes or song structures that you had to adopt or you researched, or was it your general approach, or was there anything particular to the Assassin's Creed Valhalla score?
Well, there's no specific scales that I used. I wanted the music to have a more updated and modern sound. So the instruments themselves, I feel, give a lot of the Viking atmosphere to the score. I also, the way I write is very much in atmosphere. That's really my, and especially for this project, it became the first thing that Ubisoft asked us. We need the music to feel very authentic to this world. It's not. Like other projects, the story is the first thing you talk about, and that you start from there. But with Assassin's Valhalla, it became very much about the world. And I think as people have played it, it's clear that this world really is a very detailed, authentic, living, breathing world. And when you have this giant world that you can freely explore, having this music come in and support that is what makes video games too. It's a totally different way to work, and it gives you a lot of creative freedom to be able to write these pieces of music for when nothing specific actually is happening in the story. You kind of have to sit back and come up with a lot of ideas yourself. Whereas in a movie, you're always kind of like the story is always there to give you ideas.
Yeah, I have to say, when I first heard the music, I mentioned a little bit, I spoke with Einar a little bit, and I mentioned this to him. I'm American. I have a bit of a cartoonish understanding of, Vikings. And so when I first heard the music, or before I heard the music, I was expecting, rah, 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 Vikings, and then when I actually heard it, I was, oh my goodness, this is absolutely beautiful. And as you said, very atmospheric, very expansive, very engaging, and just, symphonic in a way that is just timeless. And I have to say, you really nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
Thank you, man. I mean, that is very interesting. You should say that, actually, because the first music that I wrote for the game, the feedback came back, this music is too dark, because I had some of the same ideas there. I thought Viking music, it has like a dark, pulsating drive to it, Vikings, but as they started showing me more and more of the game, it was very clear that the music also strongly needed to support when you were not engaged in a mission, to encourage you to explore this world. And that was one of the challenges, to find out, well, then what does Viking music sound like when it doesn't have that darkness to it? That was really something that I had to go and explore and experiment with to find out, what is this? And again, that's where the spiritual side of it and the afterlife and the gods and all these things became a big help, a big inspiration,
Mm-hmm. I think for me personally, when I started seeing the first footage, it all sort of really made sense to me, because I heard the music first before seeing the footage. And, then now you're seeing these just open world, literally like expansive fields and rolling hills and just beautiful landscapes and, the ships. And you combine that with the worldview of the Vikings, animism, it all starts to make sense why it would be so rich. And it's in a way meditative, which was the exact opposite of what I expected.
It's funny, right? Because you think of it, it's like in a game about assassins, and it's like, but I do agree with you. I mean, that's very much what I was hoping for as well, that it puts you in this world, and it just kind of wants to keep you there, because it hopefully feels good to be in there,
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask, so the main theme is really just a standout, fantastic track. And you collaborated with Sarah Schachner and Einar Selvik. Can you tell us what your collaborative approach to composing it or demoing it or recording it, how did that actually go down?
Yeah, so I had some really good talks with Simon Landry, the audio director at Ubisoft in this project, and we were talking about what should this theme feel like, and what is the intent of this theme. So I did a first version of the theme, which they really liked. And so that I sent to Sarah, and she would continue writing and producing on it. Mm-hmm. And then after that, Einar got involved and did the vocals on it. Mm-hmm. So it was a really interesting collaborative process where, had the three of us not been involved, it wouldn't have ended up sounding the way it did.
hmm what is the orchestration or the arrangement there? I cannot figure out what is driving the melody.
Well, the toggle hopper is driving the melody, and that is an instrument that we use a lot on this score. Both Sarah and I, and of course Einar Selvik. It is the Viking instrument.
Okay. I need to get more familiar with that instrument because it sounds amazing. I mean, I imagine you've got some sort of, I don't know what, crazy reverbs on it or something, right? Because it's so huge, and I mean, it's just a massive wall of sound to me.
Right. Right. I mean, that is a question for Sarah, but
Okay.
I definitely like to put lots of effects on all the ancient instruments and the performances that I do here. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it makes it very modern in a cool way. It's almost like pop. It's like,
yeah. I mean, you can, I mean, that's the thing. All the music that, from my perspective, all the music that I wrote is founded in live performance. And then I do a lot of messing around with it afterwards, and also during the performance. But I think it's something that we all do on this score, all three of us. There's a lot of processing, and there's a lot of work involved to make an instrument that's like 800 years old or 1,000 years old sound any good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm waiting for the samples to come. I feel like it's going to be on top, like you're going to hear Toggle Hopper on Top 40 radio or something. So I've heard you mention Jean-Michel Jarre and Stravinsky as influences. Is that right?
Yeah, some of my they're some of my early influences for sure. Especially when I was in the demo scene, that was a big part of what I was listening to.
And is there anything specific that you admired or absorbed from their music, or other current influences that you have that you care to mention?
Yeah, I think Jean-Michel Jarre was such an influence because he was, when his music came out, I think it was in 72 or 73, his first album came out. And, there had been some Tangerine Dream around at that time as well. But Jean-Michel Jarre really kind of made it into, it's almost pop music. It's very memorable, very strong themes. And I just remember hearing this music, and I had never heard anything like this before. It was totally alien to me, completely new. Like it couldn't have been recorded 5 years earlier. It was using the latest instruments, electronic devices at that time. And so it was something brand new to me and to everyone who heard it. And I was fascinated with that. Same thing with like Vangelis, for example. He would do all this synthesizer music as well in the 70s and 80s. And Mike Oldfield was another big influence of mine. And I love how atmospheric these three composers' music is. And it definitely had a huge influence on my the early days of trying to find my sound.
Cool. Very cool. Do you have any advice for young composers coming up, on their way up?
Well, I would say, try to make music that you're really passionate about, because that is going to result, in my opinion, in stronger music. Instead of trying to do everything and perhaps doing everything okay, it's better to do specific things very good. A lot of people, almost everybody can learn to do something that perhaps ends up sounding a bit mediocre, but you want to set yourself apart. So you want to focus on something that you're really passionate about, and then you want to, just invest a lot of time in that. I think that's a good path, and don't pay too much attention to what's popular right now, because once you're done figuring out how to write music, we might be in another place, so yeah, that's some advice I can give right there.
Yeah, so it's basically be more of a specialist than a generalist. Would you say that's right?
I think so. Blow people away with something special, instead of trying to be able to do everything. I think that's a good path. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and be patient. I mean, I made music for years and years and years before I felt like it was starting to get any good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm going to butcher the quote. I can't remember what the quote is, but it's something like, most people fail right on the precipice because they give up on the precipice of success, right? They're not patient
Right.
enough.
And it really comes down to, you gotta have a drive to do it. If you're doing it for the wrong reasons, then it's when crunch time comes, or when things get really hard, you're more likely to give up or something, and it's not a glamorous life, sitting in a room alone full of music instruments. It's
Fair enough. Yeah, I know.
So,
I'm conscious of your time, Jesper, so I have two more questions for you. Do you have a dream project that you'd like to compose for?
well, Assassin's Creed is a dream project. You get to go to different time periods and different regions, and so there's all these new things you have to research and kind of invent and trying to figure out how. When I did like Renaissance music for Assassin's Creed 2, I knew nothing about Renaissance music. I mean, nothing. And nobody, and I had to do a modern take on it. And nobody was making a modern take on Renaissance music back then. I mean, now you hear it more, so Assassin's Creed is definitely a dream project. I'm looking for a project that I find, fascinating, where I can push myself in new directions, but also it's really important to work with good people. I feel, people that will allow you to be creative, and a studio like Ubisoft Montreal, which is the studio that invented Assassin's Creed. I've done 4 Assassin's Creed with them, and also worked on Splinter Cell Chaos with them. It's a great studio to work for. So that's what I'm looking for. If you have a dream project and you finally land that project, but somehow they don't allow you to be creative, well, then it's not a dream project anymore.
Sure. It makes sense. Last question. Hypothetically, you're transported to Valhalla and the gods ask you to play a song. What would you play?
Any song, and not just, from any artist.
Any, whatever you want to do. The question is yours to answer as you see fit.
I would play the main titles of 1492 Vangelis.
Nice.
The most atmospheric thing I've ever heard.
I like that answer. That's a great answer. Thank you, Jesper, for your time. Congratulations. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing soundtrack. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.